Last time we went, last time we went into chapter 18,
Yes.
and the other chapter on Noble Truths, 24 we did, I remember correctly.
Right.
Yeah. So also for today, try to generate correct motivation before we do some prayers together and start with the session. So chapter 22 talks about the emptiness of the Buddha, right? For a particular purpose, in order to understand emptiness better. Yeah. So try to generate a motivation that we have to understand emptiness better, well, for a particular purpose, and for the purpose of developing our mind in a particular direction of the path to enlightenment, because the more you understand emptiness, the more you will generate renunciation, the stronger the renunciation will be, and the stronger great compassion will be, because you understand why yourself and beings are suffering, as well as the way out, right? So that's why emptiness is a very profound aspect. And so try to generate correct motivation to eliminate suffering of self and others. And for that purpose, we're here. For that purpose, we're going to study and later on contemplate emptiness. Yeah, so generate correct motivation. And then as we do a few prayers, like last time. We still have them?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So we think in front of yourself is Sakyamuni Buddha, surrounded by the masters of the Nana tradition, like Arya Nagarjuna, for example, all the way up to His Holiness Dalai Lama. And surrounding yourself countless sentient beings in human aspects, but undergoing individual sufferings. And think you have to develop your mind in the stages of the path, in particular emptiness, for that purpose, and to make an auspicious connection to help them. We start with leading them in the prayer. Yeah? So praise to the Buddha, the Heart Sutra, and the Foundation of Noble Qualities. To the founder, the down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond.
The one gone beyond, the full destroyer, completely perfected, fully awakening being, perfect in knowledge and good contact, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of humans, teacher of God, the humans, to you, the complete and fully awakened,
to you, the complete
and
fully
that is
awakened
the
one, transcendent destroyer.
Massimo, please mute yourself.
Oh, sorry.
To the founder, down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sagata over the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of God's human beings, to you, the complete fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, and subdue from the Sakika, prostrating of Refuge. The founder, down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, complete, perfect, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sagata over the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of God's human beings, to you, the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from the Sakika, prostrating of Refuge. When the supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you played out in 7 strides, and then said, I'm supreme in this world. Pure, wise, then I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, flame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you prostrate. With supreme science, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you prostrate. Thus, really like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the founding having all understanding, the field of merits with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one come to dustness, I prostrate. The purity that frees from attachment, the virtue that frees from the lower realms, the one path, sublime pure reality, the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. And those who are liberated and show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified to realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma Refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devote homage. To all worldly of aspects, abound with bodies, as many realms and all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a reverberation, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, drop or a dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. To this merits may all sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the full faults, and be delivered from the sour ocean, prepared by the waves, aging, sickness, and death. I prostrate to Arya triple gem. Thus I heard one time the Bhagavan was dwelling in the forest mountain in Rajgir together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the characters phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Abhilasvara looked upon the very practice of the found fraction of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also of emptiness nature. Then, to the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra says to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Abhilasvara, how should any son of lineage train who wishes to practice the activities of found fraction of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Abhilasvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activities of found fraction of wisdom should look upon it like this. Correctly, I'm repeating, beholding those 5 aggregates also empty in nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, empty is not than form, and form is not than empty. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, the composition of factors and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there's no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomena. There's no element, up till including no mind element and the mental conscious element. He has no ignorance, extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to including no aging and death, Similarly, there's no suffering, origination, station, and part. No exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas rely and dwell perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely beyond sorrow, they reach the end point of nirvana. And all the Buddhas who dwell in 3 times also manifest completely away to the supreme, perfect, complete, in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, and surprise mantra, the mantra equal to unequal, the mantra to pass by all suffering should be known as the truth, since it's not false. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is declared Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in found perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Abhilasvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that one should practice profound perfection of wisdom, just as you indicated, and even the Tanaga's 3 points. The Bhagavan having just spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Abhilasvara, and those surrounding there entirely, along with the worlds of gods, human Suras and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of the kinis of the 3 chakras who abide of the holy using space. By the powers of clairvoyance and magic illumination, look at the practitioner like a mother for a child. By the teachings of the 3 sublime jewels present the power of truth. May inner and outer hindrance be transformed. May it be dispelled and may it be pacified. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. And may we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to the Dharma. And may our enjoyments in accordance with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here and right now. Then here we go to page 93. The foundation of all good qualities is the kind and perfect pure Guru. The correct devotion to the Guru is the root of the path. By clearly seeing this and applying great effort, please bless me to rely upon the Guru with great respect. Understanding the precious freedom of this rebirth is found only once. It's greatly meaningful and difficult to find again. Please bless me to generate with minds and unceasingly day and night takes its essence. This life is impermanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly it decays and death comes. After death, just like the shadow follows the body, the wisdom will follow. Finding definite and firm conviction in this, please bless me always to be careful, to abandon even the slightest negativities and accomplish all virtuous deeds. Seeking samsaric pleasures is the door to all suffering. They are uncertain, cannot be relied upon. Recognize these shortcomings. Please bless me to generate a strong wish for the bliss of liberation. Led by this pure thoughts, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teachings is keeping the Prasangika vows. Please bless me to accomplish this in practice. just have fallen to the sea of samsara, so of all mortal migratory beings. Please bless me to see this, train the Supreme Bodhicitta, and bear the responsibility of free migratory beings. Even if I develop only bodhicitta, but not practice the 3 types of morality, I will not achieve enlightenment. With my clear recognition of this, please bless me to practice the bodhisattva vows with great energy. Once I pacify distraction to wrong objects and correctly analyze the meaning of reality, please bless me to generate quickly in my mind stream the unified part of calm abiding special insight. Having become a pure vessel, but training in the general part, please bless me to enter holy gateway of the fortunate one, Supreme Vajrayeika. At that time, the basis of accomplishing 2 attainments is keeping pure vows and samayana. As I become firmly convinced of this, please bless me to practice vows and pledges throughout my life. Then, having realized the importance of the 2 stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, by practicing with great energy, never giving up before sections, please bless me to realize the teaching of the Holy Guru. Like that, may the Gurus who show the noble path, and spiritual friends who practice their long lives, please bless me to pacify completely out in the hindrances. In all my lives, never separated from perfect Gurus, may I enjoy the magnificent Dhamma. By completing the qualities of stages and paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. Janjo Bado Dani Yazuji Dagi Chushi Give Sana Dola Penja Sangye Loba Jo Sangye Chuda Sumi Janjo Bado Dani Yazuji Dagi Chushi Give Sana Dola Penja Sangye Loba Jo Sangye Chuda Sumi Janjo Bado Dani Yazuji Dagi Chushi Give Sana Dola Penja Sangye Loba Jo Yeah. So today, chapter 22, more emptiness, so to say. Yeah, never enough. And yeah, I used one quotation last Wednesday, but a few of you were then not there, so I can use it again. So that's a very nice quotation, because it's a quotation of Shantideva's 9th chapter of the Bodhisattva Charavattara, you know. And as you know, Shantideva's text, the Bodhisattva Charavattara, is also very profound, and as well as chapter 9 is very profound. Yeah? So you can see, if you have a little bit understanding of Buddhist tenets, then Shantideva's text, yeah, Shantideva Center, right? Yeah, that's auspicious. Yeah, so Shantideva's text number, chapter number 9 is all about emptiness, and talks about the different, the different schools of Buddhist philosophy, and then a very interesting way how Shantideva actually refutes misunderstandings and put forward the correct form of reality. Yeah? But in the first verse of that particular text, it's a very interesting verse, because it talks about why emptiness is so important and the benefits of emptiness in a very kind of profound way, that we want to go that direction, and for that direction we want to realize emptiness. Yeah, so it's very interesting verse. It says that all the branches of the doctrine, yeah, so that means all the teachings of the Buddha's, you know, holy words and teachings, yeah, all of that, all the branches. You can think about the kasa, the 3 baskets, you know, of the teachings, or you can think about Sutra and Tantra, all those teachings, yeah, the powerful Lord, referring to the Buddha, expounded it all for the sake of wisdom. Yeah, so all those teachings are mainly meant for individuals to realize emptiness, because without realizing emptiness, you cannot achieve liberation and you cannot achieve enlightenment, as you know. Yeah. So the powerful Lord expounded for the sake of wisdom, meaning the wisdom realizing emptiness. And for that purpose, the Buddha taught the doctrine. Why? Because we know that among the refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, right? The actual refuge is the Dharma, you know, and the actual refuge of the Dharma is the direct perception of emptiness and elimination of afflictions, right? That's our safe direction. It's not kind of that's the real direction of what we call resultant refuge of the Dharma. That means you take refuge in your own future accomplishments. You know, you take refuge in your own future realizations of emptiness, in your own abandonment of afflictions, right? That's the real safe direction we go if we take refuge. Yeah, so among taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, we know the Dharma is the actual refuge. And then among the causal and resultant refuge, taking refuge in other people's realizations or taking refuge in your own future realizations, then your own future realizations is more important, right? So that means that it's a very scientific in one way, right? Refuge is not really, of course, it's partly is based on a particular fate, but fate is based on reasoning, right? You want to have your own development in the future, and that's your direction, you know? That is your safe direction, because if you realize emptiness, you abandon affliction. If you abandon afflictions, you're in the process of stopping suffering, right? So that's the real refuge. As we know, refuge has two causes, right? One cause is the fear of the suffering of samsara, yeah, in the middling scope, or the fear of suffering of sentient beings, and individual liberation in the great scope. Yeah, that's one cause of taking refuge. And the other aspect of refuge is seeing that the object of refuge has the potential to lead you beyond that particular suffering, right? Yeah. So that means that if you understand suffering together with the causes, you know, the direct cause of suffering, as we know, afflictions, destructive emotions, anger, you know, excessive desire, jealousy, pride, fear, depression, anxiety, right? So that is all created by this ignorance. Yeah. So the real safe direction for us is to generate a mind that can eliminate these wrong views or these negative thoughts or these destructive emotions, right? That's the real safe direction. And what is that safe direction is our own development in the future of getting the realizations, right? Yeah, so that's the real refuge, so to say. It's very logical. No, it's not. That has actually nothing to do with religion. If you think about, you take a safe direction in improving your mind, that's kind of a very universal aspect, right? And then we go, because we're interested in Buddhism, then we go to the full extent of eliminating all affliction together with the seeds, all destructive emotions together with the seeds, yeah? And that's that kind of aspect of the mind, that is our safe direction, and that will give us the real protection. Yeah, so that is the cause of giving us the potential to eliminate the things we like to eliminate. Yeah, it gives us the potential to eliminate suffering. So all the Buddhist teachings are meant to acquire this particular Dharma jewel in your own mind. Yeah, so that's our direction in the future. That all the teachings of the Buddha are meant for that purpose. Of course, the Buddha was a great scientist. You know, if you think about you know, quantum mechanics related to emptiness, it's very, very interesting. Very interesting, especially in the developments in quantum mechanics over the last few decades. You know, with Carlo Rovelli coming very close to interpretation of Nagarjuna. So it will be very interesting. Next month we have a dialogue with Carlo Rovelli. Yeah, I thought last time I met with him some time ago. A very, very interesting personality. Yeah, coming from quantum gravity into the philosophy of Arya Nagarjuna, and then tells me I can completely agree with these points of Arya Nagarjuna. It makes sense. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, so that means that this ultimate nature of reality, yeah, when we talk about emptiness, seems to be also, according to modern science, the ultimate nature of reality, right? It's very interesting. Yeah. So then the Buddha explained that, but the Buddha explained that for a particular purpose, not that it's just interesting, but in order to eliminate suffering, right? That's why the Buddha explained it. Yeah. So yeah, that's all the teachings of the doctrine are meant to realize emptiness, because that is our real refuge. That is our real safe direction. If you realize emptiness, you're in the process of eliminating these kind of causes for suffering. Yeah. Okay, so that's the powerful Lord expounded for the sake of wisdom. Therefore, line number 3 in that verse for Shantideva, they must generate this wisdom, meaning the disciples, yeah, us, who wish to have an end of suffering. So if you wish to stop suffering, you should generate this wish to understand and realize emptiness. Yeah, so that's that's a very interesting quotation of Shantideva in that way. And in the commentaries on Shantideva chapter 9, then one of the Nyingma masters, His Holiness, recommends a lot, Dr. Kempo Kunzang Pelden. Yeah, so in that commentary on this first verse, then Kunzang Pelden talks about if you realize emptiness, almost automatically compassion will become stronger, you know. So it's not that the realization of emptiness produces compassion, but the realization of emptiness helps us to generate compassion, you know. That's what it is, you know. That's kind of and yeah, as Holiness also comments often about that point. He says, if you have a genuine form of understanding of emptiness, your compassion will increase, right? Why is that? Because if you see there's no inherent I to be found, yeah, and you see that the cause of suffering is this ignorance, grasping at this inherent I, or mind, or the self-deceptive thought, or the self-identity, yeah, then also you see the people around you have exactly the same thing. Yeah? So it's probably, if you have a good insight into emptiness, and you see there's no concrete I to be found, then you look around and you see people, what you see is actually continuities of consciousness and a physical body, and that's what it is, right? There's no separate self than the body and the mind. So if you look around and you see people walking and doing the activities they're doing, it's just kind of bodies with a mind, that's it. But because their minds, they think there's a self, all of them, they think like that. And that's why they create problems for themselves, because they create anger, or create jealousy, or pride, or excessive desire. And that causes people to steal, that causes people to create harm to others, you know. So you see that around you, and you know there is no real self to be found. But because of this misunderstanding or misapprehension, those people just consciously create causes for samsara, right? Yeah, so understanding that aspect, probably it helps you when you come out of the meditation of emptiness and you see that, it helps you to generate compassion. If you already have some meditations done on compassion, right? Sorry. So if you have done some contemplation on compassion before, and that's quite experiential and maybe not a realization yet, then you get a field of emptiness and that compassion gets enhanced, right? It becomes stronger because of these reasons. Yeah, so that probably makes sense. Yeah, what is said in the commentaries on that particular first verse of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. Yeah. Yeah, so the chapter, and in the chapter 9, you see very similar aspects as we see in Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. So if you combine, for example, the chapter on the Four Noble Truths, if you've done a little bit of studies in the commentaries on the chapter Four Noble Truths of Arya Nagarjuna, the fundamental wisdom, and then you go into the 9th chapter of Shantideva, you see a lot of common things. There is causality, and also there's emptiness. And there's kind of what it is, a union between conventional and ultimate truths. Yes, we know conventional truth and ultimate truth are basically in one nature. That means that a particular object, our body, our mind, the screen, the camera, those objects, they have many aspects, right? Our body has a skin, has flesh, has bones, yeah? Has a shape, has a color. But our body also has the aspect of being momentary changing every split second, right? And our body also has the aspect of being empty of inherent existence. There is no inherent body to be found among the different parts, or in a collection of the parts, or one with the body, or different from the body. We cannot find a concrete I am mine in this particular body, right? So there's also an aspect of the body, an ultimate nature aspect. Yeah. So that means that every phenomena has a conventional aspect and an ultimate aspect. Yeah. So conventional aspect, different types of color or shape, and the ultimate aspect being empty of inherent existence. Yeah. Or another aspect of conventional truth is momentary changing nature of our body and mind, and the ultimate aspect is being empty of inherent existence. Yeah. So we always have a conventional aspect and an ultimate aspect, right? Yeah. So Arya Nagarjuna proves a lot of those points from the point of view of those two realities, and see there's no contradiction. Yeah. So that we see throughout chapter 25 of 24, the Four Noble Truths, right? And that's very much relates what Shantideva talks about in chapter 9 as well. Yeah, there's many points. Anyway, that's for later if you read chapter 9 again and then go back to those chapters you're studying now in the cycle. Yeah, then you see a lot of common things, and that's what it is. You know, study means you read one text and you read another text, and in one text is different reasoning used than in another text. So it helps you slowly to form your understanding better. Yeah. So that's why those two texts together is quite interesting. Yeah. Especially chapter 9 of Shantideva, and then these chapters you're studying in this cycle at Shantideva Center. It's very similar material. Yeah. So if you study both, then it will help you understand emptiness better. Yeah. Okay, so then we go to the actual text, chapter 22, yeah, of the examination of the Tathagata or the Buddha. Yeah, then, so 22nd chapter has about 16 verses, and yeah, is very similar to previous things we discussed. Yeah, so maybe we just start with the first verse. So here it talks about eliminating inherent existence of the Buddha. So that means that everything is empty of inherent existence. Nothing exists from its own side, right? Our body, our mind, you know, the person, so to say, nothing exists without dependence. Nothing exists all by itself. Yes, and in quantum mechanics, we come to the same conclusion, that there is no entity out there that exists without dependence. Yeah. And even the Buddha himself is empty of inherent existence. And even emptiness itself is empty of inherent existence. Because the Buddha depends on many factors to come into being, to benefit beings. Yeah. Emptiness itself also depends on many factors. Yeah, it's always empty of something. And what is that something? And in relation with an object, right? So there we say emptiness is empty of inherent existence. The Buddha is empty of inherent existence. And that's a point Carlo Rovelli pointed out to me, and he said, that's very unique in this form of philosophy, because most forms of philosophy, they always hold on to something ultimate to be there, right? Well, there is not something ultimate to be there existing from its own side. Yeah, so Nagarjuna refutes that. He said emptiness by itself is also depending on something else than itself, right? So there is no ultimate reality existing all by itself, so to say. And that's, Carlo Rovelli said, that made a big impression on me, he said, when he heard this aspect of Nagarjuna. So it's very interesting, yeah. But then the Buddha also is empty of inherent existence. So this chapter talks about that, yeah. 16 verses about that point, yeah. Okay, let's go to verse number 1, because you can also apply those verses to yourself, right? Especially the first verse. His Holiness Dalai Lama uses that very, very often, the quotation of the first verse, and then said, instead of reading the Tathagata, just think to yourself. Yeah, I am not this, I am not that. Yeah, so we see that. Okay. So in the first verse, it talks about a few points, and well, 5 points. Yeah, in relation with the sevenfold reason of Chandrakirti, it talks about 5 aspects. So we go to that. Okay. So what does it say in verse number 1? It says, neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates is the Buddha. Yeah. So that means, as we talked about in chapter number 18 last time, if things exist, yeah, if things exist, they one with or different from your computer, right? The computer itself is one with the computer, but anything else than the computer is different from the computer, right? Yeah, only the computer itself is one with the computer. Everything else is different. The table, right? Your body is different from the computer. So there's a first form of reasoning. If something exists, it should be, technically speaking, it should be one with A or different from A. Or it should be one with table or different from table. There's no other possibility. And that's the first form of reasoning in our meditations on emptiness as well. It comes up here. It says, neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates. That means, that's the clue, right? There's an I that appears inherently from its own side. When you get angry, or a strong desire rises, or affliction, or fear for death, that's kind of something you grasp on and you want to protect, right? So the clue is get a clear idea, how does that I appear, right? So the way it appears is creating a problem. And that's what was the Buddha's main interest. The Buddha was not interested just merely the nature of reality, but what is the cause of our problems and how can we eliminate it? So if you get a clear picture how this I appears, when you get angry or when excessive desire comes, you see there's a connection between the emotion and the grasping at itself, right? Yeah, there's a very simplified example of, I tell you all, please, if I count to 3, then you get angry. Okay, 1, 2, 3, come on, get angry. There you go. Then it's very difficult to produce anger. I mean, for some people, maybe they can do that. But if you're very tight, you can't do that. Yeah, but for some of us, it's difficult. But if I say, you know, look at your hair, look at your glasses, what kind of microphone, what kind of, you know, headset do you have? It's just terrible, you know. If I talk like that, then you think, what? How dare this monk say this to me? And then the I comes up, and because of the I, anger generates and becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, right? So you can see the emotion is rooted in a concept of I, otherwise it doesn't come up. If I just ask you, please get angry, then it's more difficult to generate anger. But if I relate it with something that is related with self-protection or self-cherishing attitudes, then very easy, it comes up. So there's a correlation between, with desire, same thing. I need this, I need that, you know. So it's related with the concept of I, or as David Bohm calls it, self-identity. Yeah, David Bohm also says this self-identity is very convincing, but actually it's just a show. It's not really there, but a very convincing show, and that's why people take it as apparent reality. So they are the words of David Bohm, which is also a personality, in quantum mechanics. Very interesting. So that means that the way
Geshe, you're frozen.
conclusion that this apprehension of the self is just an imagination. It's just mentally fabricated. That doesn't really exist the way it appears. So be interested in how it appears, because the way it appears causes a problem. We think there's a strong I, and because of that we get angry, we get excessive desire or attachment, or we get jealous or pride, or all the aspects of low self-esteem. Is all depression, is all rooted in a concrete concept of I am I. Yeah. So the way it appears causes a problem. So we have to check, does it actually exist? And then the Buddha came to the conclusion, it's just an illusion. the way it appears. So that's what we're going into. So then that means that if it exists the way it appears, I should be able to find it somewhere, right? Yeah. So then we say, okay, if it exists the way it appears, it should be either one or different from body and mind. There's no other possibility. Whatever exists is either one with your computer or different from your computer. The computer itself is one with, and your table is different from the computer, right? So everything that exists is either one with or different from our body and mind. There's no third possibility. So that's the first step, right? After recognizing how it appears, very essential point, right? See how it appears, what we call the object of refutation. Yeah. So the object of refutation has to be very clear. So how does I appear? Yeah, because that's what we're going to refute, right? So how does I appear when you get angry or close to death? Sometimes you want to protect something, you know. So how does the I appear? You know, and then you get a clear picture how the I appears, and then you know the way it appears is a problem. So you want to refute that object of refutation. So you check if it really exists in this way. I should be able to find it. And what is the reason? It should be one with or different from my body and my mind, right? So then you check. If it's one with your body, and then you see the I appears very solid, like without any individual parts. That's how it appears, right? But the body has many parts. So it cannot actually be one with the body because the body has many aspects and many parts, and the I doesn't appear like that. So if something is one with your computer, it should have very similar aspects. Otherwise, it can never be this one with the computer, right? So if it's one with the body, it should have similar aspects. Otherwise, it cannot be one with the body, right? So the I doesn't appear in that way. It appears to be very solid all by itself, without any parts or aspects as such. So you say, oh, it cannot be one with the body. Then maybe it's different from the body, right? So then you put your body aside. Does the I still appear? It's not, because it's, say, my leg, my arm. It's not like a cat and a dog be completely different. You know, there's a correlation, but so it cannot be inherently different. Yeah, so then we come to the conclusion, it's not one with the body, it's not different from the body. Then you check your mind. Oh, maybe it's the mind. It's maybe one with the mind. But our mind, in a very similar way, has many aspects, right? We have 6 types of consciousness. We have main minds and mental factors. We have different moments of consciousness, more coarser forms of consciousness, more subtler forms of consciousness. In this, all the different aspects, the I, how it appears, doesn't appear to have all those aspects. So it cannot be one with the mind. So then you say, oh, maybe it's different than from the mind. But if it's inherently different, like a cat and a dog, it's also not the case, because we say my thought, my feeling, right? So also it cannot be different from the mind. So you see, the way it appears cannot be found among body and mind, because it's not one with the body, it's not one with the mind, it's not different from the body, it's not different from mind. It's not there. Yeah, so at that time, you get an insight into that the I actually is not there. Yeah, so that's kind of how you produce a realization, eventually, a realization of emptiness. Yeah, so that's the first line. Neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates. Yeah? So here talks about the Buddha, but as His Holiness always says, exchange it with your own name, right? Where is Tenzin Namdak? It's neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates, right? So if you meditate like that, then it can be quite powerful, this verse. Yeah. Then the second line, it says, the aggregates are not him, or the aggregates are not you, nor are you the aggregates. Right? Yeah, so because the aggregates change momentary, and the I doesn't seem to have that kind of aspect, right? So the aggregates are not you, and you are not the aggregates. You referring to this inherent I that appears, right? Yeah, so it's very funny how the I appears. It seems to be mixed, but not the same. You see that? It's a very sneaky aspect of ignorance. Yeah. It seems to be, one way it appears to be a little bit mixed, but actually it's not one with and different from. So is just an illusion the way it appears. It's not really there, you know. So with reasonings we try to prove it's not there the way it appears, right? Yeah. So you see, it's not neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates. The aggregates are not you, and you are not the aggregates. Yeah. So that's kind of because if you are the aggregates, so to say, then there's no agent and object, you know. So then the aggregates and the appropriator or the agent becomes the same, right? Yeah. So that doesn't make sense. Yeah. So that's the second line of yeah. You're not, the aggregates are not you, and you are not the aggregates, right? The physical body, is that you or not? What about the mind then? You know, so that you can also think in that way, right? So if your body is you, then what is the mind then, right? And are you the body or not? And so you question yourself. So that all helps us to understand that the way the I appears, we cannot find it in the body and the mind, right? And the only possibility, if it exists, it should be in one way connected with body and mind, yeah? Otherwise, there's no possibility, yeah? So that's how we try to analyze it. Then it says the Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. So it is not that, you know, Tenzin Namdak is possessing. You know, Tenzin Namdak exists from its own side, possessing body and mind of Tenzin Namdak. And you call your own name and you say, is there something that is me, but that possesses the aggregates separate from body and mind? Is that true or not? You check, you analyze that. So if you contemplate this verse from many angles, it can be very interesting and can move the mind in a direction to see that the self, the way it appears, is not really there. If I analyze it, whatever I try, I cannot find it in the body, cannot find it in the mind, cannot find it different from the body, different from the mind. My body is not me and I'm not the body. You know, the mind is not me, I'm not the mind, you know. And then there's no something that is the I that possesses this all. When the I appears completely independent, how can you possess things if you're completely independent? Is there really a controller separate from body and mind that possesses the body and mind? Is there something like that? Can you find something like that? Yeah, so something different from the aggregates, but in control. Is that possible? That's a question. Yeah. So then you see actually that that's not possible if there's something independent, that's the way it appears, but then be in control or possessing the aggregates, right? Yeah, it's quite, yeah, so we can use this verse in many ways. Yeah. So when His Holiness once gave commentary on, I mean, a few times, but sometimes His Holiness mentioned also, when His Holiness, for example, practice like Lama-Chöpa, you know, and His Holiness says you take refuge, right? And then the merit field, or whatever practice you do, the merit field dissolves into you, and then you generate yourself as a deity. Normally, that's kind of a common practice in the Vajrayana, right? So what His Holiness then often uses two verses of Nagarjuna in that process. It's very interesting that His Holiness goes back to the root in order to help us to enhance our practice. It's very interesting. So then first he used the verse when Buddha Sakyamuni is in front of the praise of chapter 20, what is it, 27, I think. So the translator says, you moved out of compassion, you eliminate the wrong views, you teacher of the sublime Dharma, to Gautam Buddha, I pay homage. Yeah, that's one praise of Arya Nagarjuna to the Buddha you can find back in chapter 27. And that, His Holiness says, he recites that, thinking that by moved out of compassion, the Buddha was completely motivated with eliminating the suffering of others, right? Because of that, he entered the path and realized emptiness, you know, and then helped others to eliminate the suffering by eliminating the wrong views of ignorance. So you moved out of compassion, you eliminate the wrong views. Yeah, the second line. You teacher of the sublime Dharma, line number 3. You teacher of the sublime Dharma, referring to the Buddha's teachings on dependent origination to prove emptiness. Yeah, so You move to have compassion. You eliminate wrong views, the wrong views of ignorance. You're teaching the sublime Dharma, the sublime Dharma of dependent origination. To Gautam Buddha, I pay homage. So that verse, His Holiness says, he recites. So in the practice he does. And then he recites this verse when the Buddha dissolves into you, or just before the Buddha dissolves into you. Then His Holiness recites this first verse of chapter 22, that neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates is the Buddha, right? The aggregates are not the Buddha, and the Buddha is not the aggregates. So the Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. The Buddha doesn't possess. What is actually the Buddha? Where is the Buddha? So then you get an idea of emptiness, right? So then you dissolve the Buddha into yourself, then you contemplate emptiness and generate yourself into deity. That's how His Holiness uses those two verses, very simple two verses from Arya Nagarjuna's works of this particular text, and brings great benefit in the contemplation. So that's His Holiness told on a few occasions that he did it like this, on a daily basis, those two verses. So that gives us a kind of idea that it might be quite important to contemplate those verses. So the Buddhas and His Holiness, they don't say these things just because it's nice to talk about it, but for a particular purpose, right? So it's very interesting. There's just two verses, it's very profound. Okay, so that's kind of verse number 1, right? It talks about more common forms of reasoning for those who have studied Chandrakirti's sevenfold reasoning. Then here are kind of 5 points related to that. So that talks about the Buddha, so to say. So then from verse 2 until and including verse number 8, then it talks about the relation between the Buddha and the aggregates. So that means that the appropriator means the merely imputed person on top, which is imputed on the mere collection of the aggregates, appropriator. So that's verse 1. Sorry, until including verse 8, and then verse 9, and remaining a few remaining verses, they talk about what is that which is appropriated, the aggregates, right? So we have two aspects, right? We have a person and we have the body and mind, or the aggregates. And from both angles, we see there's no inherent existence. If we see there's no self to be found in the merely imputed person, and there's no self to be found in the aggregates, we can conclude there is no self, right? And so that's the meditation, so to say, on emptiness in relation with those verses. Okay, so then verse number 2, it talks about the appropriator, right? The person, the Buddha. So it says, if the Buddha depended on the aggregates, he could not exist through his self-nature. So here in this translation, self-nature refers to inherent existence. It depends on the term to be translated. And so so here in the first 2 lines of verse number 2, it says, if the Buddha depends on the aggregates, if there is dependence, because there is dependence, because we are merely imputed upon our aggregates, right? Tenzin Namdak is just merely imputed on his body and mind the time Tenzin Namdak became a monk, right? So that mean is just a mere designation, a mere labeling, designated independence upon the aggregates. So that means that if that's the case, if the person depends on the aggregates, how can the person then exist all by itself without dependence? That is not possible, right? So that talks about first 2 lines. Then it says that which does not exist through self-nature or inherent existence, how could it exist through the power of inherent other things? So if you come to the conclusion that the person is merely designated, the person is merely imputed, then the Namdak is just a merely imputed aspect of, on top of this mere collection of body and mind, right? So if you see that Tenzin Namdak doesn't exist inherently, then also wherever Tenzin Namdak depends upon can also not exist inherently, right? If you have a seed that doesn't exist inherently, when you put it in soil with fertilization, heat and moisture, it will grow into a sprout, right? And it only grows into a sprout because the seed doesn't exist inherently, and the things around it, other than the seed itself, also don't exist inherently. And that's why there's a process. Yeah? If the soil, the heat, the fertilization, the moisture, if all those aspects exist from their own side without dependence, then a process is not possible. There's no correlation between the seed and those external factors, right? So the seed doesn't exist inherently, and those factors around it, heat, moisture, fertilization, etc., they also don't exist inherently, otherwise there's no correlation, right? Yeah. Because there's a dependence, of course, an effect relationship of the point of the seed, and also from the point of view where the seed is planted. Yeah, you see that? Yeah, so from both sides, there should be an absence of inherent existence. If things exist from their own side, inherently, there's no correlation possible with that object. Yeah, you see that? Yeah. So that is referring here in verse number 2, that in the last 2 lines, it says, if the person Tenzin Namdak, or you call your own name, if you see that's merely imputed, and imputed by dependence upon the body and mind, then it implies that the body and mind also should be empty of inherent existence. Same as the heat, fertilization, moisture is empty of inherent existence, because otherwise the seed will never grow, right? So in a similar way, if we see that the I of a person, which is merely imputed, Tenzin Namdak, or your own name, is merely imputed on your mere collection of the aggregates, if that's the case, then also the aggregates should be in that same nature, otherwise there's no dependence, right? Yeah, you see that a little bit? Yeah, so that's been explained in this last 2 lines of verse number 2. Yes, it can never be the case that something is independent and something is dependent and that correlates with each other. That's not possible, right? You cannot have, subatomic particles who exist from their own side without dependence being a part of a process. It's not possible. Every individual particle relates with another particle. Yeah, that's why they say in quantum mechanics, the correlations between particles are of more interest than the individual particles, yeah? Or are of more importance than the individual particles. Yeah? So that's proving this aspect as well. Yeah. So that's verse number 2. Then in verse number 3, it says whatever is dependent upon another entity, right? Same reasoning. Yeah. Then its selfhood is not feasible. That means if the seed depends on the soil, then the seed can never exist from its own side, right? You see that? Yeah, same for us, our mind, when somebody says something to you, something not nice, yeah? Or something nice, also possible, then you think in a particular way, right? You react. So there's a correlation with what you hear and what you think. There's nothing that exists from its own side, right? Yeah, so that's a kind of a process. So here, same thing. If something depends upon something else, then that's if something, make it more clear, if something depends on A, if A depends on B, then B also should depend on A, right? It's not that A depends on B, but B doesn't depend on A. That's not really possible. Of course, the level of dependence might be different, but there is a dependence, right? So that means if A depends on B, then B also has a dependence on A. Yeah, so that means it should be two-way traffic. You can never have something that depends on A, but A exists all by itself without any dependence. That's not possible, right? Yeah, you see that? So that's been here argued. Yeah. So whatever is dependent on another entity, that particular that is depending on something else, that by itself should be empty of inherent existence, right? Yeah, otherwise, there's no dependence. Because things are empty of inherent existence, that's why there is dependence. And because there's dependence, things are empty of inherent existence. Yeah, so the seed is empty of inherent existence because it grows and produces a sprout, right? Yeah. If the seed existed all by itself, it would never be able to do that. Yeah, so same for the soil, exists in an independent way, otherwise it can never help the seed to grow, right? So there's a constant cause and effect relationship without anything that exists from its own side, without dependence. Yeah. Yeah, so there's the first 2 lines of verse number 3. So then how could the Buddha you know, how could it be a Buddha which lacks itself? In a similar way, the aggregates are empty of independent existence, and the Buddha is empty of independent existence because of that reason, right? Yeah, so same for us. Our body and mind are empty of independent existence, and that proves that the person is empty of independent existence. And because the person is empty of inherent existence, that proves that the body and mind also empty of inherent existence. Same as a seed in relation with the causes and conditions that produces the sprout. It's two-way traffic. Both are in the nature of interdependence. Yeah. Yeah. So so that's very true. You know, if you see what is the person, or you call your own name, right? It's just a label, isn't it? You cannot really find that particular person in your body. You cannot really find it in your mind. So it's just merely imputed upon the mere collection of body and mind. Yeah. So if you, whatever you call your own name, is merely imputed on, it's very true. You know? Yeah. I didn't tell people here, but yeah, maybe. So when I was in St. James Park, is a park here, is close to the Buckingham Palace. Some people know the joke already, but yeah, a few of you not. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So I went to St. James Park, which is close to Buckingham Palace. As you know, the Queen lived there. Yeah. So then probably there was a little child who came up to me, and the child, a little girl, was told by the parents, I think, you know, the Queen lives here, and maybe you meet her, you know, and she's very different from other people, and you know, her skirt and very different clothing, and completely different than normal people you see, you know. And this girl is looking for the Queen everywhere and can't find it, and a bit depressed. I have to find the Queen. And then this girl came up to me and looked at me, and she never saw a monk before. She said, "Are you the Queen?" So that means that in the mind of this girl, there's the inherent Queen. He should be the Queen because he looks completely different than others. And my parents told me it's a person who looks completely different. So it has to be like this, you know? So that means that from that point of view, you can see that the Queen is just merely imputed by the mind, right? I'm merely imputed by the mind, but in the mind of this girl, she sees it as from its own side existing aspect, you know? Yeah, so, and of course it depends because the Queen looks in a particular way, and that's how we label Queen correctly. Yeah, but we often technically call suitable to be called a basis that is suitable to be called a Queen. So I'm not a suitable person to be called a Queen. It's not the proper basis for that. But in the girl's mind, it was a bit confused and thought, oh, this is it. You know, so you can see mere imputation. We grasp to it as impermanence, right? But it's just merely imputed. The Queen is merely imputed. We are merely imputed, you know. So, and often you see in cultures, people grasp to things as real out there, but it's merely imputed by the mind, like different customs, or, you know, in India, for example, the heroes on the TV, they always have from Bollywood, Hollywood, or they have Bollywood and yeah, South India. This is not a Kannada series. So there, the main hero is black leather jacket, big mustache, like, you know, black, and sunglasses, dark, and walking like that, you know. So when we see a person like that, we think, we almost laugh. We think, what is this, you know? But in their eyes, it's kind of the hero, right? But the hero doesn't exist inherently out there. You see that? It's just merely imputed, but that imputation, people see it as inherent, and then they grasp to that, our hero, or the Queen, or this, or that. You see that? Yeah, so that's what it is, right? The way we impute aspects, they merely impute it, but we see this as inherently. We see them in an inherent aspect, and that causes a problem. That also causes us to grasp more towards it, and you know, it's very interesting if you see that in cultures or many aspects, you know, like in Tibet, in the early days when they didn't see, you know, when they went to bed, they put out their tongue or they clap their hands. And then when they clap their hands, then Westerners who came there, they thought, oh, they're welcoming us because they're clapping their hands. But actually, for the Tibetans, is to get rid of spirits, because the Westerners have blue eyes and the eyes are inside and big noses. So they thought, oh, spirits coming, clap in your hands, right? So that means that it's many things are just merely imputed, but we see it as very concrete out there. You see that? Yeah. So that's the thing. We also merely imputed. Yeah, like the hero on a movie is just culture related. It's just imputation. But they don't see it as imputation, they grasp it as reality. Same is true for the object of attachment, the objects of anger. Yes, we know in our meditation on equanimity, the friend, the stranger, and the enemy, they don't exist from their own side as such. But in our perception, it appears like that, and then we see it as inherent, and then we grasp it. You see that? So that's same true for the self of a person, is just merely imputed, but we grasp to that, and it becomes a problem. Because then we say, I need this, I need that. How dare this person say this to me? So this I, which is just merely imputed, we grasp as a very concrete I and mine, to exist independent all by itself. And that causes a problem. But it's just an imputation. That's what it is. Like the queen, like the hero, like this kind of aspects of culture. Yeah, so that talks about in verse number 3. Yeah. Okay, so maybe a short break. Yeah, just a brain break. 5 minutes is okay, or yeah, to look out of direction. This, yeah, they say 20 means 20 minutes screen, 20 minutes or 20 seconds in another direction for 20 feet. That's what they say here in the UK to prevent fatigue of the eye on the screen. Yeah, so we did a bit longer than 20 minutes. So yeah, maybe just 5 minutes break. Just yeah. So that means UK time, let's say 8 past. Yeah, I don't know how that. Huh? Yeah, 10
Yes,
past
okay.
maybe. Yeah, 10 past 4. I don't know how much that is in Casa in New York, but yeah. You
Okay,
can,
so 11:10 in New York.
Okay.
Okay.
So I have a break for another 7 minutes. Yeah,
Yes.
relax.
Okay, everybody, see you in 7 minutes.
Short break, very short one. Yeah. Yeah, we had a bit of long weekend here because yesterday and today we did also a few things with the students. Yeah. Okay, everybody back, and then we can continue. Yeah, so make sure you have the same motivation. Yeah, before we continue. Yeah. All right, so I mean, that's a very interesting point that's been made here, is that the self is merely imputed, right? We saw with this hero, it's just imputed on how the person looks like, or the queen is just imputed how the person looks like, right? But we don't see that aspect only, we grasp to that. On top of that imputed aspect, we see it as existing from its own side. Yeah, and that causes a problem. The same whereas Tenzin Namdak, if you call your own name, is just an imputation merely on body and mind. We cannot find anything else than the body and mind, right? So on top of this mere collection of body and mind, we label, oh, this is the person. Yeah, so we label this in the person, that is the correct form of reality. But then what we do, we see this person as existing from its own side. Yeah, the same with the friend, enemy, and stranger. We think, oh, this is a friend because this person cherishes my ego, right? It's nice to me, so this person is my friend. But somebody else sees that same individual as a very, very difficult person to deal with, right? So that means that what we see as a close friend, somebody else can see as the worst enemy. Happens, right? Yeah. If you see some of our friends have arguments with others, yes, so the other people, they see our friend completely different. So what we say friend doesn't exist from its own side in that object, because if that was the case, then somebody else would never be able to call that person an enemy, right? Yeah, so that means that the friend, the enemy, and the stranger is just merely imputed by the mind based on a suitable appearance. And that makes us to believe, oh, this is this aspect, so that's why I label this in this particular way. But it doesn't exist out there as being such. Yeah, so same for the person, you call your own name, Tenzin Namdak, is just merely imputed upon the body and mind, but then it appears to exist from its own side, right? You see that? So that's actually the problem. So that Lama Tsongkhapa and Nagarjuna, Master of the Past, they say that aspect of this merely imputed I, that aspect of this merely imputation that appears inherent, that is just an illusion. Not that the person, the mind, and the body is an illusion. That's not the case. It's just the appearance of inherent appearance. That is not really there. And that's why it's been called an illusion. Yeah, so that distinction has been made very clearly. That there isn't merely body, there's a mere mind. And on top of that, we impute, but we see that imputation as existing from its own side, right? And that's very interesting, because that helps us to see that there is no real person to be found the way it appears, in a very inherent way. We cannot find the inherent friend in our friend, because somebody else sees our friend as an enemy. So that means that our friend cannot exist from its own side as a friend, right? If it exists out there without dependence as a friend, then everybody should see that person as a friend. And that's not the case. So you see, friend, enemy, stranger in our meditations on equanimity is just merely imputed, right? But that mere imputation, if you see that in an inherent aspect, that causes the problem. Because we say, oh, this is my friend. And we generate a kind of attachment or wish to be with a person. When we're not with that person, there's a kind of uncomfortable feeling, right? With the enemy, it's kind of, oh, I don't like this person, I want to be separated from that person. And then we generate more anger, you know? So based on seeing the person as inherent bad, yeah, the person, if the person really exists the way that appears to you, then everybody should see that person as an enemy. And that's not the case, right? So that means when anger takes over, it imputes more faults on the object than the object actually has. It's merely imputed, right? When you see a person and you walk away from that person, you're annoyed with that person, what do? You walk away with this mental image of that person, not the person. So this mental image is fabricated by the mind. It's merely imputed. Yeah. Then you impute more. You say, oh, this person is bad because of this, because of that. How dare this person say this to me? I'm not like that. So you create a mental image even more stronger in the sense of having faults. It is still all merely imputed by your own kind of conceptions. But the problem is, we think that's reality. We believe that our mere imputation exists from its own side. And then whenever we hear the person, whenever we see the person, we get angry, you know? So you can see that things that are merely imputed, that by itself is not a problem, right? Because that's the nature of reality. Yeah? But if you see that mere imputation as existing from its own side, inherent, then it causes a problem. You see that? Yeah. So it's the same for us human beings. You say the self is just merely imputed, but if you see it as inherent, then you grasp at it. And then you have attachment, or you have anger, or you have desire, or you have jealousy, or you have pride. So that means that the conventional reality of merely imputed is a correct form of reality, which we don't really understand because we see things existing from their own side. You see that? And that causes us the problem. Yeah, so that means nothing exists from its own side. If that's the case, then all what we see as friends should be a friend for everybody. And it's not the case. Yeah, so things don't exist out there from their own side without dependence. And that's being explained here in this verse, right? In where are we? Verse 3, right? It is the last one, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, is that a bit clear or not? That things are merely imputed, but we see them as existing from its own side. And that causes us to grasp at it, to be it like that. Yeah, so that's why in our culture we do things and we think that's reality, but in our culture it's completely different. Yeah, so we see that clapping the hands, we do that to applause and to give people, well done. But in Tibet in early days, it was done to remove spirits from the village. Or another thing is to put out your tongue, right? For us, it's very, we don't consider that as kind of polite to put out your tongue when somebody passes by. But in the Tibetan culture, is very respectful. Yeah. So that things that are merely imputed by a culture is seen completely different in our eyes or somebody else's eyes, right? Because we grasp to all these kind of aspects to exist from its own side. And then you see it's just merely imputed, right? Yeah, merely imputed by mind. Yeah. Okay, so then verse number 4, it says, if there's no self-nature, so if there's no inherent existence, right? How could they bear an other thing, in a sense, something else than itself that exists from its own side? As we just discussed, the seed is empty of inherent existence. The only way it can make a connection with something else than itself is that other things also in the same nature of dependence, right? So that means that the seeds and the heat, fertilization, moisture, both of them, they relate with each other, and both of them have a correlation, cause and effect relationships, and neither of them exists from their own side, right? Same with our body, same with our mind. There's a correlation between the two. Yeah, if you study different aspects of neuroscience or what we call neurophenomenology, right? How does consciousness influence the brain? Yeah, what does our thought process, how does that affect the brain? And how does that whole process affect our mental and physical health? Yeah, so there's a correlation between mental states and physical health, and there's a correlation between physical health and mental states. It's a two-way traffic, right, between body and mind. So that means that within the body and mind, we cannot find anything that exists from its own side without dependence. Yeah, because it's a process, right? Our mind is a process, the body is a process, the correlation between the two is a process. There is nothing that exists from its own side separate from this process or within this process. Within this process, it cannot exist, because how can you have something that is a part of a process that exists all by itself without dependence? It's not possible. Everything that exists within a process has to be a part of that process and the correlations within that process, right? So it can also not be completely separate, yeah? Because if there's a dependence between our conventional I and our body and mind, then there should be a two-way traffic of this dependence. Yeah, there cannot be something completely different being controlled at the same time. So we come to the conclusion that there is no inherent I to be found among the body and mind, in the process of body and mind, so the different from the process of body and mind we cannot find. Yeah, so that's what we're about here. So what is actually the Buddha, or what is actually you? Yeah. No, if you just check, where are you? You're there sitting on a chair or something on the floor, but what is sitting on the floor and what is sitting on a chair? You just check what actually is sitting on the floor or sitting on a chair. That's a question, Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's much more to say to the different verses, but then it becomes a bit too complicated, I think, because it talks about certain types of refutation of other schools. And it's not only other schools, but also for our own interest, it's kind of, okay, this self is merely imputed, right? And that's all the school of Buddhist philosophy agree upon that the person is merely imputed upon, I should say merely, I should say imputed upon aggregates. All schools of Buddhist philosophy, they agree that meaning the definition of a person is a self that is imputed upon either of the aggregates. All schools of Buddhist philosophy accept that aspect of the definition of a person, right? But some schools of Buddhist philosophy, they say, but the body and the mind, they exist from their own side. If they don't exist from their own side, you cannot find anything, right? Then the consequent school says, if things exist from their own side, that means that things don't have dependence. So that doesn't make sense. Yeah, so they go a bit refining that aspect of the aggregate. So that's debated here if you read the commentaries with those schools. Yeah, because it's true, right? If there's a merely imputed person that is imputed upon body and mind, if the body and mind exist from their own side, then this cannot be imputed upon something that exists without dependence, right? Yeah, because we label the queen as a person who has different features that is suitable to be called the queen, right? Yeah, so that means there's a dependence of labeling the queen, a dependence on the label, and that label depends on the basis of imputation, which is this aspect of how the queen looks like, right? So her body, her face, things she's wearing. So that means that from the side of the aggregates, also there is a correlation with how we impute, right? There's dependence. So the aggregates also don't exist from their own side. That's what has been said here. If the aggregates exist from their own side, how can you impute something on top of that? Because what you impute depends on the aggregates, and because of that dependence, the aggregates depends on what has been imputed upon. Same with a friend, enemy, and stranger. From their side, they also depend on how we label, how somebody else labels, right? Yeah, so there's the two-way traffic of dependence. So that being the case, the person as well as the aggregates, both of them should be empty of inherent existence. Yeah, so that's been here debated a little bit. Yeah, number 4. So yeah, that comes down to is that if you look, where are you? You're sitting, right? Not standing, I see, you're sitting, right? So what is actually sitting? Who is sitting? Who is thinking? Is there some I separate from your body and mind that is sitting and thinking? And when
You're frozen.
dependent, being in control, where is that I? If it exists the way it appears. If it exists the way it appears, you should be able to find it somewhere, right? With the body, separate from the body, with the mind, separate from the mind. But if you just sit down with a cup of tea, meditation doesn't mean go up to the mountains and sit in a cave, right? You can just sit down and analyze, where is this I? If it exists the way it appears, if it's in my body, in my mind, or separate, who is actually sitting? And who is actually thinking? It's very interesting. There's nothing separate from your body and mind, and within your body and mind, you cannot really find in that process of, your individual aspects of your body, the organs, the bones, the flesh, the skin. Is there something there that exists from its own side or not? So in that way, the 4 close placements of mindfulness can be very helpful. Even in Shantideva's chapter number 9, it's about, what is it? I think 15 or 20 verses talks about 4 close placements of mindfulness. Very interesting. A different aspect of the body you analyze and you cannot find itself, right? And different aspects and the process in the mind you analyze and you cannot find itself. It's just a process of coming and going, right? We're breathing, our heart is beating, the blood is, going different direction. We eat food, they get digested. Is there something in that whole process, something that exists inherently that we call this I? Is it true? Can you find that in your body? That's a question, right? That's your homework. And then same with your mind. It's a process, you see things and there's a feeling, what you see, and because of the feeling you react, and there's a thought. But in that process of feeling, reaction, thoughts, in that process of the mind, is there an I that exists all by itself, that is in control? Can you find that in the mind in that way? So you check, and then you see that actually within the body you cannot really, if you just scan from the tip of your toe all the way up very slowly to your legs and lower part of the body, upper part of the body, all the way up to the skull, in your eyes and your brain and all those things, if you analyze, you cannot really find an I that exists from its own side, right? Yeah. And then in your mind, same thing. You cannot really find it in the thoughts, in the perceptions, in the feelings, you know. So you see, it's not really in the body, it's not really in the mind. Then you put your body and mind separate. Is there something still there? That is the I, separate from body and mind? It doesn't seem to exist in that way, right? But that's the way to contemplate these points, you know. Then you see there is no real I to be found, you know. Yeah, and then some people they get a bit kind of shaken up. And there's nothing wrong with it, because it gives an idea that the concrete aspect we grasp onto, what we say since the beginning of lifetime, that starts to break down, and that gives a little bit of uncomfortable feeling, right? But in the same way, in some bodhisattvas who have a lot of merits, they're blissing out when they see this, you know, because they find the jewel, the wish-fulfilling jewel that leads them out of suffering, right? It's something they're looking for a long period of time. Exactly, if you study the Buddha's previous lifetimes, it's very, very inspiring, you know, to see that the Buddha over countless periods of time accumulated merit. Why? In order to realize emptiness. Why? In order to help others. You know, it's very, very, very brings sometimes great inspirations to see that, you know. And then checking constantly. And then when you walk for that purpose, all for the benefit of realizing emptiness, as we talked about in the beginning, the meaning of the teaching is all to prepare people for realizing emptiness. Then when you see emptiness, then certain bodhisattvas, they're so happy because they saw what they were looking for such a long time on the spiritual path, right? So you can imagine if you found something like that, it's just like there's nothing compared to that, right? It's $1 billion. It's nothing. It's just kind of not of any importance at all. You know, because the billions of dollars doesn't help you to achieve happiness, and we can see that. You know, people have billions of dollars, they're not happy, so they go into space for half an hour or something. They pay a few $100,000. You could do much more better things than being in this thing shaking up and be extremely tired when you come back. But yeah, it's exciting, and then it feels like. But the next day, the feeling is gone, right? There's no, when they come down and they make pictures of them, it's like, whoa, amazing. But yeah, the next day is kind of no satisfaction. You want to do something else. Yeah. So that means that the money doesn't really produce any happiness, right? So, but if you understand this reality and you see that, oh, that's kind of the real present. Yeah. You like presents, but that's the real present you like to acquire. Yeah, because that leads you beyond suffering. Yeah. So all these verses helps us to give reasoning to think. That's what it is, right? And we study and we try to meditate and try to contemplate. But if you meditate and contemplate in relation with these verses and logic, scriptural reference and logic, it has a very powerful effect. Why? Because scriptural reference of masters who have realized emptiness, right, and were predicted by the Buddha, like Arya Nagarjuna, you read that material, you think back and forth, it can bring great blessings, you know. That's why His Holiness sometimes just use 1 or 2 verses in his personal practice to enhance understanding of emptiness. You know? So that, yeah, it seems to be quite important. Also, if you read biographies of masters who have realized emptiness, yeah, I don't know if mentioned here, but Tsongkhapa, one great masters of modern times, yeah, who had a realization of emptiness, and then wrote a very brief letter. I think it's only 10 pages, but very small, small pages in Tibetan, to His Holiness, offering his realizations to His Holiness of the insight into emptiness. Right. So on the bottom of the letter, he wrote to His Holiness, please don't show this to anybody else, because we don't like to talk about. People don't like to talk about personal experiences, especially when it comes to realizations. But then after he passed away for some years, then His Holiness said, probably His Holiness often said, oh, it should be spread. People should read this. And it's gives incredible inspiration when you read something like that, because you see a person who has studied in depth. He was one of the greatest scholars. Tsongkhapa was an incredible master. You know, there's one story when he went to a retreat, he only had Lamrim Chemo with him, you know, and then he wanted to do a retreat, and then stones were dropping off a mountain, and he thought, oh, that's funny, and he was following where the stones come from, and then he went up into the mountain, and then the stones were just dropping in front of a rock, you know. So he thought, okay, go there. So he went there, and then behind the rock was a cave, right? He thought, oh, maybe auspicious. So he went down, and in the cave there was a skeleton of a person. Probably he did some retreat there before. So he went in front of the skeleton, offered mandala, right? When he finished offering mandala, the skeleton completely collapsed. He thought, that's very auspicious. I use this as a place for meditation. So then he stayed in that cave with a few friends quite further away, you know, and then probably he got quite some realizations. Later he came to Dalhousie and did some retreats with people, and some people got even calm abiding. Stories about some lay people, very interesting. One lay people got calm abiding within a few weeks even. Very interesting stories. It's very inspiring, right? But then when he wrote his biography, or his, you know, it's not a biography, it's just offering his realization to His Holiness. Very interesting. He says, it's true, it's reasoning and scriptural reference that we have to depend upon, you know. And then he talks about, when he saw emptiness, he also talks about how he misunderstood it initially. Yeah, that he saw the different, or merely imputed and mere nothingness. He couldn't relate those two aspects very well. But then when he had this insight, he said, as soon as he came out of the realization or out of his meditation, he just saw cause and effect, nothing else, like just bodies and minds and the cause and effect relationships, right? So that appearance of inherent existence probably becomes less, right, if you realize emptiness. So it's very inspiring to see. But the thing is that it's scriptural reference and reasoning. It seems to be quite important. Also, Lama Tsongkhapa, to realize emptiness, as you know, realize emptiness by depending on chapter 18 of this particular text. Yeah, we did previously. And well, the first verse of chapter 18. Yeah, that particular verse. So that means that it seems to be quite important. And His Holiness put a lot of emphasis on using verses, and, you know, like the first verse in this chapter, you put your own name instead of the Tathagata, and then you check, you know. In all these verses, you can do a similar meditation. The more reasoning you use, right, the more you tackle ignorance. We need many reasons to tackle it. And so because of the karma of having heard things before, certain reasons help us better than other reasons, right? You know, so that's why if you redo this text quietly, you study it, but also you think about it, right? As His Holiness often tell the monks and the nuns that, you know, we do a lot of debates, clapping our hands and hardcore philosophy. It's very interesting. Yeah, but it's only, and very helpful, extremely helpful. So in the West, we have discussions. It's very helpful because we talk about scriptural reference and reasoning, right? So scriptural reference and reasoning is very essential. So we study and then we contemplate and we discuss, you know, contemplate and discuss in a debate style or in discussion groups. That means that we have just one form of thinking with a particular subject. Somebody else has another form of thinking with a particular subject. When it comes together, you can learn a lot, right? So that's why dialogues can be very nice and very helpful. You know, you can see the different dialogues coming up with scientists. Also here, we have this program of you know, Science and Wisdom Live being put up last year. Very interesting, you know, to see in a dialogue, in conversation, the different forms of reasoning about reality and how to come to a particular conclusion, because we just have one mind, right, with one form of reasoning. So it seems to be quite important. Yeah, that combination of scripture reference and reasoning. Yeah, and then you enhance it with accumulation of merit, purification of negative deeds, make strong prayers to the teachers, etc., etc. And then things will move in a particular direction. So that's, yeah, it seems scripture reference seems to be quite important. And yeah. So you see His Holiness teachings are always, how short they are, they're always based on a particular text. Yeah. So did you find the eye already in this process or not? Yeah. Once, sometimes, remember, Roger is very busy normally, but sometimes we talk and then we also something else. Namdak, did you find I already? Just call that on the random time. That Namdak, did you find I? Yeah, interesting. Yeah, oh no. So yeah, that's and that's true, right? We read this and then you check where is the I, you know, and what actually is sitting, what actually, and then slowly we shape different reasons, and then one reason can maybe bring more benefit than another for oneself, and one moves in a particular direction. Yeah. Okay, so that's verse number 4. But then verse number 5, that's another refutation that is happening. It says, if without depending upon the aggregates, where Tathagata then now, it should feasible that he would be depending upon them. Therefore, he would exist through dependence, right? So here it constantly talks about the aggregates, which is the appropriated, and appropriator, the person, right? So we constantly talk about those two aspects. There's a person who is merely imputed, and there are the aggregates without a suitable base to be imputed, right? So if the person is imputed, that means that the aggregates also have a dependence on the imputed, right? That means that the aggregates cannot exist from their own side. And because the aggregates cannot exist from their own side, also the person cannot exist from its own side. You see, it's going back and forth. Yeah, so that's throughout many of these verses, just from different angles, it talks about more or less similar thing. But because of different angles, it helps us to think in particular ways and using reasoning to come to the correct understanding. Yeah. Yeah, so here also as an example with verse number 5 in the commentaries, the Buddha is merely imputed. Why? Because the Buddha is merely imputed by the power of having eliminated obscurations to omniscience, right? So the Buddha trained in many levels on the Bodhisattvayana to become a Buddha. When the Buddha achieved the final goal, then we say Buddha, not before that. You see, so the Buddha is merely imputed by the mind. Same in the commentaries, it talks about, in a similar way, a wealthy person. A wealthy person is only being labeled wealthy the time it's being considered, according to the common understanding, this is kind of a wealthy person. But before that, that person was accumulating wealth, was not a wealthy person yet, right? So you can see it's just merely imputed. Yeah? That the Buddha is just merely imputed about a continuity of mere collection of continuity that achieved this particular realization of omniscience, right? Yeah, so you can see, same with presidents or ministers who got elected, then at the time they get elected, at that time there's a mere imputation, right? And then we grasp to that as existing from its own side. If an elected president exists from its own side, then in the past also should be exist in that way. Yeah, because inherent means without change, without process, right? Yeah, so that means merely imputed by the mind aspect. Yeah, so a wealthy person or the Buddha himself who has eliminated all afflictions with seeds and imprints. Yeah, yeah, so this is verse number 5. Then in verse number 6, it says, inasmuch there is no Tathagata, then no dependent upon the aggregates. Yeah, so then, because prior to becoming a Buddha, that also depends on the aggregates in the past and the present, right? So that means that since there is not anything which is not dependent, how can it be appropriating others inherently? Yeah, so that means that if we see that the Buddha is merely imputed, then the aggregates of the Buddha also should be merely imputed and cannot exist from their own side. Yeah, so this is refuting a few schools who think, okay, we accept the person to be imputed, but the body and mind exist from their own side. Yeah, there's a few schools who think like that, you know, that the body and the mind exist from their own side. For example, according to most schools, except the consequent school, they think if you ask, okay, the person, if you have a debate, for example, between the consequent school and the autonomous school, right? Two middle way schools. So then the autonomous school says everything is merely imputed by the mind. The person is merely imputed, consciousness is merely imputed, the body is merely imputed. That the autonomous schools say. But then you ask the autonomous school, yeah, okay, everything is merely imputed, but what is then the person, right? So this is a very important point to understand in order to realize the subtle aspect of the consequent school. Yeah. So that means that the autonomous school says, yeah, everything merely imputed. There is no truly existing self. There is no truly existing body. There's no truly existing mind. Yeah. But they say the body and the mind exist by their own characteristics. It means that they say, the autonomous school, they say, if you look for something, if you look for the person, right? It's merely imputed, but the person is imputed upon something, right? And that's something you should be able to find. If you don't find that something, then nothing exists at all. That makes sense, right? That's what the autonomous school is putting forward. So they say, okay, the person, the body, the mind doesn't exist truly, but the person is imputed upon something, and that's something you can find. And what is that something? They say it is this mental consciousness that goes from this life to the next lifetime. So they say that's the basis, right? You can find this consciousness, it's right there. And on top of that consciousness, we say, oh, that is the consciousness of Tenzin Namdak. So on top of that, we say that is the person Tenzin Namdak. Makes sense, right? To a certain extent, or not? Yeah, so they say you can find something right there, the consciousness of this person that goes from this life to the next. That is the person that exists by its own characteristics that you can find. And if you cannot find it, there's no basis of imputation. So that's what we put forward as the person. Okay, then the consequence comes around the corner and said, okay, is that true? And then they say yes. Yeah. And then the debate starts. And then the consequence school start to argue. Okay, everything's merely imputed, we accept. Yeah. But if you look for something and you can find something, that implies something exists from its own side. That's what the consequent school says, right? Even that consciousness, which is the basis of imputation, according to the autonomous school, even that basis you cannot really find. Because consciousness is a stream of a process of individual moments, of individual thoughts, of individual coarser and subtle states of mind. Within that whole process of moments or thoughts or subtle or coarser forms of mind, we cannot say it's this or that, right? We cannot really pinpoint it down. And then a consequent school says, even that basis of imputation, this consciousness, is also merely imputed. You see, so the consequent school is a little bit more subtle than the autonomous school. You see that? Yeah, so that's why studying tenets helps a lot to build up. And this point is very essential. Why? Because we talk about objective refutation all the time. When we have to realize emptiness, you have to refute the objective refutation, right? So the objective refutation of the consequent school is what the autonomous school put forward as being the person, you see? So you have to get a very clear understanding of these two schools in order to really grasp the meaning of the consequent school. Yeah, so in practical terms, it means that the autonomous school says, of course, that the person, Tenzin Namdak, is imputed, right? It doesn't exist truly. You know, Tenzin Namdak is just imputed. But Tenzin Namdak is imputed upon a basis, which is this consciousness. And that consciousness I can pinpoint. I said, this is the consciousness of Tenzin Namdak. And based on that, we say, oh, this is the person Tenzin Namdak, right? Yeah. So that's the autonomous school view. But then the consequent school said, but that consciousness you cannot really find among the moments, among the coarser and the subtle aspects, among the different thought processes. Yeah. So I often use the example I find quite helpful. You know, when I was young, you know, I was traveling and hitchhiking across Europe, and sometimes I had a week off in summer. I did some work for 1 or 2 weeks, get some money, and then hitchhike, sometimes with a friend, sometimes by myself. One day I was a little bit going to spirituality, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to hitchhike to Austria, one of my favorite countries at that time, and I'm going to meditate in the mountains and rivers and in nature. So I hitchhiked to one of the places I was before, walk there in the mountains and sit under a tree and sit close to a river and those kind of things. You do, right? Sometimes when you're young. So I still remember that picture of that little, it's not a big river, it's very interesting. You have snow mountain in the back, and there's this river in front of you from the snow mountain and goes into a beautiful lake, very quiet place, very nice. At that time, of course, I just didn't know what to meditate. I was just sitting there stupid. But if I recall that image, it's very interesting. Because there's a snow mountain, the snow is melting, that becomes water, that enters a kind of little stream, that becomes a river, and that goes into a lake, right? Yeah. But where is actually the river? What is actually the river? We see that a river is also merely imputed upon, in technical terms, in science, we say time and location, right? That means from the time the snow that melts becomes liquid, right? Until it enters the lake, that particular time, in a particular location, we say this is the river. But if you sit a little bit long across the river, then those water molecules, they pass by and go into the lake, right? So the moment they enter the lake, they're not a river anymore. You see that? So you can, if you sit there, it's just, depending on time and location, you say, this is the river, nothing else. It's not out there as such, you see that? So with our consciousness is very similar, you know? It's kind of, since we started until now, we have all those different thoughts about 1 hour, 50 minutes, right? Yeah, so that means that for 1 hour, 50 minutes, we have these different thoughts coming and going, coming and going. Sometimes the mind is more coarser, sometimes more subtle. So is there something we can pinpoint, this is the consciousness? It's not really to be found, right? So that means the consequent school starts to say, you cannot really find anything out there. Even the basis of imputation is merely imputed. Even consciousness itself is merely imputed, like this river. Depending on the time and location, the different thoughts we have, we say, okay, this is the mere collection of these thoughts, and this is the mere collection, and based on that mere collection, we say, okay, this is consciousness. Nothing else, right? You see that? So that's kind of the more subtler interpretation of what consciousness is all about, yeah? And what the self is all about is just merely imputed by the mind, yeah. Yeah, so that talks about those points here a very similar way, yeah. Then it says 7, where there is no appropriation, right? So, meaning, you know, that the aggregates are appropriated, yeah. How is it not the case with the appropriated then? Yeah, so there's two things, right? There's the aggregates and the self. So if the self exists merely imputed, the aggregates also should exist in dependence, merely imputed. Yeah, so then you come to the I and the body and mind relationships. Yeah, then you see it's just merely imputed by the mind. There's nothing else. Yeah, so if you sit down, you check your body, you check your mind, you come to the conclusion there is no I to be found, right? Just in a particular period and time, you say, this is the body and this is the mind. It's just imputation based on the particular time, right? And location, same as the river, it's very similar. Yeah. Yeah, and then a few verses are summarized in this verse number 8. Yeah, that's kind of a conclusion for the first 7 verses, so to say. There it says, having searched through the fivefold means. Yeah, in verse number 1, we talk about 5 points, right? Neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates, too. Yeah? The aggregates are not him, and he is not the aggregates, 4. And the Tathagata doesn't possess the aggregates, 5. Yeah? So those 5 points, fivefold means of reasoning, very similar to the first 5 of Chandrakirti's sevenfold reasoning. Yeah? Having searched through the fivefold means and finding it neither identical or one with the body and mind, nor different from the aggregate. Yeah, so it's not one with the body, it's not different from the body. So where is the self? Or where is the Buddha? Or where is the Tathagata? You know, be designated by the power. So it is merely imputed, but not by the power of inherent existing aggregates, right? Even the aggregates themselves also are empty of inherent existence. So that's very interesting, because if you relate that point with the autonomous school, we say, yeah, this consciousness is the self, then the autonomous school which says the consciousness is the self, yeah, then the autonomous school says that, and the consequent schools tell you, oh, but even that is merely imputed by the mind. You cannot really find that particular consciousness, as you cannot find the river, you cannot find consciousness. There's something there, right? There is a thought process, there is coarser and subtler states of mind, but we cannot pinpoint this is it. You see, we cannot pinpoint this is it. So we cannot really put something forward as if from its own side existing consciousness. You see that? Yeah. So that's a little bit what has been eventually here being referred to. Yeah. So you can see the fivefold reasoning, and especially the one and different reasoning we started with. It seems to be a very sophisticated form of reasoning, because everything that exists is either one with or different from body and mind. There's no other possibility. And many meditators and many scripture references, they find it a very powerful method of meditation, because you get a clear picture how the eye appears, right? Without losing it, you hold it. Then with the other corner of your mind, you analyze. Does it exist in the body or in the mind, or different from body and mind? You come to the reason that the way this appears, which is still upheld by the mind, is not to be found in the body. It's not to be found separate from the body. It's not to be found in the mind, not separate from the mind. It's not there. Why it's not there? Because we saw the only possibility is one or different, right, from the body, or one or different from the mind. No other possibilities. So if you have the first reasoning clear in your mind, you realize, okay, if it exists the way it appears, it should be one or different, no other possibility. Then you analyze. You come to the conclusion is not one, it's not different. Then you can see, oh, it's not there. So then you can get if you have probably strong concentration, that's why you need quite some concentration for this, right? It's not like, oh yeah, okay, emptiness, yeah, okay, yes, like action. Then you never really get into it, right? So you have to sit in a very strong concentration, see how the eye appears without losing it, give a clear appearance to it, analyze without losing the appearance. Is one or different? It's not one, it's not different from body, it's not one or different from mind, it's not there. At that time, a person can generate an insight into what we call emptiness, right? The lack of inherent existence. So if you have a clear picture how it appears, because we said the way it appears solves the problem, yeah, then you analyze if it exists this way, it should be one or different from body and mind. It's not one with or different from. There's no possibility, it's not there. At that time, actually what should happen to your mind is this lack or this absence of this I should appear to your mind, right? And that can be a bit kind of shaking up the system, because something you grasp on until beginner's lifetime is now to be seen, not to be there. So there's a kind of, some people find a bit frightening, or whoo. So maybe if you get a who feeling, it's good, yeah? And then as soon as you get a who feeling, then go back again to the contemplation over and over again. See how it appears, refutes it. See how it appears, refutes it. You know, so then your understanding becomes more and more sophisticated, and then one day it becomes a kind of, depending on concentration and accumulation of merits and purification of negative deeds, etc., and study. Then one day it can come. You know, that's kind of our future, right? One day it will be used like that. Yeah. But then from verse number 9 onwards, it talks about the aggregates themselves. Yeah? So until including verse 8, it talks about the person, right? The appropriator, so to say. Yeah, it talks about the individual, the person. What is that? Yeah? So we talked about the relation between the person and the aggregates, and now we talk about from the other angle, we talk about from the point of view of the aggregates. Yeah? So then also there it says that all those appropriated, meaning all the aspects of body and mind, do not exist inherently, right? So when something does not exist through itself, or when something does not inherently, it cannot possibly exist through other things inherently. Yeah. So if the body and mind, there's two-way traffic, right? we say the imputed person doesn't exist inherently, right? We reasoned. And now also we say that the aggregates don't exist inherently. Yeah, so it's two-way traffic because the person doesn't exist inherently. It depends on the aggregates. And because of that, the aggregates don't exist inherently. So in the same way, when the aggregates don't exist inherently, also the person doesn't exist inherently. You see that? It's kind of two-way traffic. Yeah, so it's a very nice way of this, how this chapter is actually structured, right? The first 8 verses, I mean, verse 1 is just a summary, right? Then verse 2, including 8, talks about the person, right? The appropriator. And verse 9 and below talks about the appropriated or the aggregates, and see the correlation between those two. Yeah. And that's true, right? If one depends on the other depends on the one, right? You see that? There's just different forms of reasoning for us to use and go back and forth. Yeah, so that's verse number 9. And then that's been concluded in verse number 10, more or less. Yeah, so verse 1 until including 9 is being concluded in verse number 10, where it says, thus, both the appropriator, the appropriated, the aggregates, and the appropriator, the person, are empty of inherent existence. Yeah. So in a similar way, the Buddha is also empty of inherent existence. In a similar way, also the aggregates of the Buddha are empty of inherent existence. Yeah. So let's just take the Buddha as an example, but we can apply it to ourselves, right? That's what it is. Yeah. Yeah, and then there's a few more verses, but I thought maybe stop. Yeah, auspicious connection, not finishing. Sometimes it's good. This morning we did preliminary practices with the BP students yesterday and this morning. And yeah, it took all more time than I initially thought, so we didn't finish. But then I said, okay, good for future. Then we can go over more in the future. Yeah, so think like that. Okay, yeah. But yeah, the talks about similar aspects, you know, of what we just talked about. Yeah, but yeah, sometimes it's good to stop halfway through. Yeah, okay. So, see, there's an auspicious connection for one time in the future, or next life, or whatsoever. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it is. That's true, right? Sometimes that's also when you receive all transmission. The teacher always read a little bit in the beginning, in the end, to make a connection again to meet this kind of teachings, right? So yeah. Anyway. Yeah, okay, keep the tradition alive, I should say. Yeah, okay. All right, are there any questions left? Then we can still spend a few minutes if you want. Yeah.
Dave, did you have a question? Did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yes. So take a table. So conventionally, the table is merely imputed. So there is the mind imputing the table, and there's the basis which the table is being imputed upon, and then there's the imputed table that is conventionally existing.
Yeah, try again. We have a connection problem.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So take, for example, a table, and it merely imputed conventionally.
Yeah.
And so there is the mind that's doing the imputing, and then there's the basis, the part of the table, and then there's the imputed table.
Yeah.
So
imputed. Yeah.
Yeah, imputed table. So the basis, the part of the table is material things. Yeah. And then the mind, you know, the imputation in the mind is consciousness.
Yeah.
The imputed,
I mean, the consciousness is imputed, right? Yeah. Yeah. The consciousness is imputing, sorry.
No, the imputation of the table happens within the mind. It's happening entirely within the mind. But obviously the imputed table is not just mind.
No, correct.
Yeah. So what is the imputed table? What category of phenomena is the imputed table?
So the imputed table is just a mere label, right? It's a kind of term table, or we say, you know, when we generate an idea of the table, there's two aspects. One aspect is the name, and one aspect is the meaning, right? So we often talk about the name being a name generality, right? That's why it's very important to study things like logic, awareness, and knowers. It talks about what kind of mind, what is imputed, and what is that imputed, right? But that means that we have a generality of the name, and we have a generality of the meaning, right? So the generality of the name is kind of a label as such, which is based upon a meaning generality of a conceptual thought, right? So that means that both are called generalities. A generality means it's not the actual object, it's just the representation of the object. So for example, if you look at a screen and you close your eyes, you have the mental image of the screen, right? Yeah, that is the meaning.
But the meaning generality is the object of appearance within the conceptual mind. So
correct.
The table cannot be what is just in our
No, I'm not talking about, we come to that first, step by step, right? So then first you have this meaning generality that appears to your mind, that gives you an idea what is the table, right? Then on top of that idea, you impute by understanding this is the meaning, and this meaning has the suitable base to be called a table, right? And then you produce a label table, correct? On this merely imputed aspect, which is a meaning generality. So you can see how the table appears to our eye consciousness first, then we have a conceptual thought, okay, this is the meaning of the table, it looks like this, it can hold things, and etc., and that is suitable to be called a table, right? So that suitable to be called a table is what we call a sound generality. It's just a term being imputed upon a table, right? You see that? So there's two aspects there. That's important to know. There's a meaning generality created by conceptual consciousness, which is not an actual table, but an image of the table. And then on top of that, we have the what did I say, name generality, or sometimes we say sound generality, right? But it means that is the label, which is also a conceptually formed aspect. It's not the actual table as such. But the actual table, the mere collection of the actual table is suitable to be called like that, because it has the suitable qualifications for that. Yeah, so that means the actual label table is not a table. Yeah, it's just a conceptually formed term table. Yeah.
So the questions remain, what is the imputed table?
So what is the imputed table? You know, that's a different question. You have to be very precise with terminology, right? What is the label? I just explained that. Yeah. The label is the name, right? If you ask me what is the imputed table, then you talk about the conventional aspect of the table. Yeah. And that is the imputed table is the mere collection of the table that is suitable to be called the table. You see that? Yeah,
so the imputed table is the basis?
No, I don't. I said the imputed table is a table that is labeled upon the mere collection that is suitable to be called a table.
So it is suitable to be imputed upon the mere collection of the basis. So what is the imputed table?
So that means that is an imputed table, right? An imputed table means there's an imputation, which is the sound generality, right? The sound generality is put upon a mere collection that is suitable to be called a table, right? So that is actually the imputed table is not out there to be found. It's just a label that's based upon the mere collection of that is suitable to be called a table.
The sound generality and the meaning generality is what our conceptual mind is perceiving. That is not imputed table.
Yeah.
And the basis, the part is not the imputed table.
The basis?
The part of the table.
The part?
You know, the top of the table, the legs and all that. So the different parts of a table.
I like the parts, yeah.
Table. And the
parts of the table are not the table. The parts of the table are not the base of imputation. It's the complete mere collection that needs to be present with particular characteristics. Okay, all this is present, so that's why I call it table, right? Yeah. Same with a car. Maybe a car is easier, right? If you have a car, if you have all the different even individual parts of the car, all they're piled up on one side, right? all the parts are there, but it's not suitable to be called a part, to be called a table, because it's not organized in a particular way, right? Yeah. So that means imputed on a mere collection means a little bit more than just the individual parts. The individual parts also have to be ordered in a particular way that we can use it as a car, and that's why we can impute a car on top of that. You see that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to go around the bush on this. Generally speaking, I understood the idea of imputation.
Yeah.
It's just that when I try to nail down, to try to precisely pinpoint, now, what is the imputed car or what is the imputed table, I find that I cannot pinpoint anything.
Very good. It's true, right? Because if you look for the person among the aggregates, you cannot find, right? You can find the body, you can find the mind, in the stream of consciousness, you cannot say it's this or that. So good, you know, it's yeah, we put you on the list of graduations of this course. Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good insight. It's true. Yeah, very good. We are happy with the insight. Yeah.
Do we have time for another question?
Yeah. Hi, F.
Jennifer, would you like to ask a question, please?
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Geshe Namdak. This has been very helpful. I'm always concerned if I look at Madhyamaka Prasangika that I will fall into nihilism. And it's you know, the Svatantrika view with the some kind of characteristics from its own side, to me, results in the ability to at least predict, you know, cause and effect, or a chili seed will give rise to a chili plant. And then we start looking at Prasangika, I still wonder how predictability and cause and effect happen.
Yeah. Okay. If you really like studying, then you should study Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on this text, in particular chapter 7, for example. There's a term called disintegratedness. You heard about the term? In Tibetan we say shikpa. In English we translate shikpa as disintegratedness. It's a very, very profound aspect of proving cause and effect in the nature of merely imputed by the mind, and nothing can be found out there. It's a very interesting interpretation. Some years ago, I mean 2 years ago in Nalanda, we had a talk about the 8 uncommon points of the Prasangika. And one of the aspects of that is that this disintegratedness. It's very interesting material. Why is very interesting material? Because it's extremely scientific. You know, I had a dialogue with Rupert Sredrack almost a month ago, 2 months ago. And he also commented upon that kind of presentation. He said, although he is, you know, he has his own ideas about things, but, you know, he says this is very scientific. And why is it very scientific? Because what Lama Tsongkhapa says, if you create an action, positive, negative, or neutral, that action comes to an end, right? Yeah, so normally we say the karmic action stops, becomes an imprint or a seed that's been planted in consciousness. When it meets conditions, it comes to ripening, right? That's normally the general presentation. But Lama Tsongkhapa, in his interpretation of this point of Nagarjuna, he says, if an action comes to a stop, it's not that the action comes to a stop and produces this separate kind of seed that is planted in this kind of consciousness exists from its own side. It's not like that. Lama Tsongkhapa says, the mere disintegrated aspect of an action that comes to a stop, that by itself doesn't go to waste. That by itself is a potential in the future, when it meets the right conditions, to produce an effect. So we talk about, with karma, it's very, very scientific. We often say in Buddhism, oh, karma, you just have to faith in it, but certain aspects of karma are very, very difficult to understand, but it's also in science, right? The more factors and the variables that are present, and if the variables influence each other, it's a very complex system. Even in science, to predict the weather here in London a week ahead is impossible, right? Because there's too many factors playing a role. So we don't know that aspect of reality. In karma, it's very similar. Certain aspects we understand, certain aspects are very difficult to be understood. Yeah? So in science and karma are very similar. Then the other aspect in karma is we talk about probabilities. That means that you have every second, you have an act, physical, mental, or verbally, or every minute or so, right? So in one lifetime, you have countless moments of activity which comes to a stop and leave this potential in your mind stream, right? Or your mere collection of aggregates. So this countless potentials, we talk about probabilities. So if you have more probabilities towards something positive, there's a bigger chance for you to meet a condition that activates that, and you go in the right direction, right? It's very scientific. Same with the Schrodinger's cat in quantum mechanics. It's not spooky at all, or the two-split experiment is not really spooky. It's just a kind of correlation between what we actually measure and a field that's around it, but we cannot maybe see what influences this aspect. And we talk about probabilities. If a probability of one particular direction is more present, that will come to an effect, right? Same in the science of neuroscience, when you talk about cases of obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, of other forms of mental issues, when the brain produces neurotransmitters, you follow, right? But if you train your mind to produce more neurotransmitters to follow positive thoughts rather than negative thoughts, the more you produce these kind of karmic imprints, as we call it, or probabilities, you train your mind to think in a particular pattern, and that the probabilities in that direction becomes more, and that being more the case, there's a bigger chance for that to come to ripening, right? So it's very scientific. Karma in that way is very scientific. It talks about probabilities, and the more probabilities you create of positive karma, as we say, that's easier for us to meet and get activated in the future, right? Yeah. So that's what Lama Tsongkhapa says is the mere stopping of an action that by itself is a disintegratedness which is impermanent. It doesn't go to waste, and it remains there in an impermanent way until it meets the conditions, and then it comes to ripening. Same with all forms of probabilities, same for how we explain memory. We look at something, we close our eyes, the consciousness of perception stops, it leaves a potential in our mind to remember, right? Yeah, so that potential is nothing else than the mere disintegrated aspect of what you saw. That's what it is. It's a very, very interesting. It's to get your head around disintegratedness. It's not that easy, but if you put some effort, it's very, very interesting. Yeah. So chapter 7, for example, of this text. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, one more.
Okay, Sunny, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. Geshe-la, thank you very much for your teaching. Can you tell me the name of the Lama who wrote the letter to His Holiness?
Ale. Tehor. Te is from Teo Kamse. This one Kamse. Yeah, Tehor Kamse. This one house group, so to say. The monasteries are divided in house groups. So this person is from Tehor. It's kind of area in eastern Tibet. Tehor, the monks from the Teo Kamse, they're from some area in eastern Tibet and Kam. So Tehor, that's because he's from Tehor. Kyorbun is referring to a person who in his class mostly recites, is the leading in the class in recitations of texts. That's a title of Kyorbun. Kyor means to recite, yeah, and Bun means kind of a master of recitation, you can translate, right? Kyorbun, so Tehor, Kyorbun, and Rinpoche is, of course, is the kind of the name, yeah, we normally use as an honorific, yeah. You can also find the story in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary on a few points are there, not about this letter, but about the person, yeah. Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary on Mandala offering, for example, yeah, the story is there also, yeah, with the name, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, New York and all the people. Yeah. Okay. So that's it for my part from this cycle of teachings of the fundamental wisdom. Yeah. So thank you so much for your interest and effort to study the texts, and hope it brings insights into emptiness to eliminate the suffering of self and others. So yeah, thank you very much for me giving opportunity to go over this material. And then, yeah, we meet again someday, someplace, somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we dedicate this merit in a particular way. It's kind of late, but yeah. Yeah. We maybe just dedicate with, do you have or not? Dedications? Ale, Peter had a question still or not? Ale.
Please. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Geshe.
Yeah.
So disintegratedness,
Yeah.
it suggests that the karma is getting less.
Yeah.
It's disintegrating. When something disintegrates, it
Yeah.
sort of disappears. But we understand also that karma multiplies.
Yeah.
If it's
Correct.
not purified. So those
Yeah.
those two, the disintegratedness, the term, to
It's
me,
true.
so that's
Yeah.
a little contradiction.
It's true. It's just a terminology you have to use, right? So in Tibetan, we say shikpa, which is something that has disintegrated and still, according to Lama Tsongkhapa interpretation, is still disintegrating. So disintegrating doesn't mean become less, right? It's not kind of degeneration. Disintegrating means actually moment by momentary change. Disintegrating is an other kind of term we use for impermanence, right? So the definition of impermanence is momentary change. When you have momentary change, it doesn't imply it is degenerated or becoming less. It's a momentary change. Another aspect of momentary change can also that it can increase, as we see with karma, one of the aspects of increase. So it's just a terminology problem in English that when we think about disintegratedness, we think something disintegrates, become less and less and less, but that's not the case. Yeah, the meaning of disintegratedness or disintegrating, so to say, yeah, some translators use that term, and the meaning of it is it's synonymous with impermanence, right? Yeah, disintegrating and impermanent nature is the same. That things momentary change in the sense moment 1 becomes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but it doesn't say that it becomes less or more. Yeah, it has two aspects. Sometimes it becomes less and sometimes it becomes more, right? Yeah.
Okay, no, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's disintegrating and multiplying.
Yeah, so that means momentary changing and multiplying, right?
Yes, yes.
So that potential is there and it multiplies in its aspect of momentary change, then it meets external conditions and then it comes to ripening, right? So that's
good.
what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, so then we dedicate also disintegratedness to be understood. Yeah, quickly achieve a state of enlightenment. Yeah, so we have a few dedications. Yeah, no need for mandala. We do another time. Yeah, so then, yeah, what do we have? Okay, yeah, maybe do everything just for auspiciousness. Yeah, got it. Short mandala, you can skip, go down. Yeah. Oops, yeah, that one. Yeah, no, the other. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So dedicate for different purposes, spreading of the Dharma, long life for the holy gurus, in particular His Holiness Lama Zopa Rinpoche, all the holy wishes to be spontaneously fulfilled, the 2 bodhicittas to be generated and eliminate obstacles and this of future lifetimes, never part of precious gurus, and quickly achieve the state of enlightenment. And then think that oneself, empty of ignorant existence, the prayer is empty of ignorant existence, and the aim we pray towards too is empty of ignorant existence, right? So that's exactly why the prayer will create a future result. You know, that's why we seal dedication with emptiness in order to understand that the prayer will produce a result, right? So think like that, and then we recite the prayer. Yeah. Dagi jina sawe gewa di tendan rowa gindan Jepa Jason Lozan Draba Yi Tempe Nimbo Rindo Salje Jo Kare Rawe Korvi Singa Pendan Dewa Malu Jonwe Ni Chenre Zigwan Tenzin Yazo Shabe Shide Padu Thank you Jitu Zanza Chen Jahang Yun Yawe Tehen Yong Bell Gunzun Dogo Ze Josung gorwe leg mentu pa na zo de gonde shabde jo janjo sanjo rimboji magye panan ye yuji yeba nyamba meba yang gonye gonde belwa goni tawa rimboji magye panan ye yuji yeba nyamba meba yang gonye gonde belwa show. As long as space remains, as long as my greater beings remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the suffering of my greater beings. May the king of Dharma, Tsongkhapa's way of Dharma practice flourish, and may the omens of obstacles be pacified, and the conditions of circumstance be complete. With the power of having made single-pointed requests to you, Lord Tsongkhapa, unfortunate manifestations of these degenerate age, illness, famine, quarreling, epidemic diseases, grand spirits, and before be pacified, and all excellent collections of condition increased. Please bless me that all my wishes be swiftly fulfilled. By invoking the power of loving kindness and compassion of charity, and through the force of making extensive prayers, may all sickness, war, fighting, famine be completely pacified, so that all beings have long, healthy, and happy lives. May the Guru's lives be long and stable, and may all beings equal and states of happiness, and may I knowledge without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may be quickly blessed to achieve the state Buddhahood. Yawa Gunda Yanda Lama Dan Dame Chigi Bella Lungi Sadang Lamgi Yunda Razo Ne Doje Changi Koba Do Sho. All right, thank you so much. Yeah, see you another time. See you.
Thank you so much, Geshe. That was really wonderful teaching. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. See you soon one day. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.